Good morning. I'm Bill Deal, President of the Greater Houston Port Bureau. We've just opened the webinar and have 150 or more people coming to join us today. So I'm going to kind of pause a little bit as we kind of let everyone sort of filter in. It kind of takes a minute or two for everyone to get on board so that they can participate and stuff like that and watch what's going on. So if you're just coming live onto the screen, again, I'm Bill Deal, the President of the Greater Houston Port Bureau. You're at our Greater Houston Port Bureau Commerce Club, which we do on the second Thursday of every month to bring industry leaders, regulators, and others that affect the port community together to talk about the issues. So one of the things, I'll start rolling because we have a very robust program here today. And normally when I looked at Vincent DiCosimo's slides, I was like, whoa, we got a lot to go. So normally we're running these 45 minutes, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold this open for an hour. We know we told you 45 minutes and some of you are gonna have to jump at 45 and we understand that, but we kind of think there may be others that wanna ask a question and we don't wanna bump up against 45 minutes and close you out right away. So if you have to leave early, that's fine. We're glad you joined us for the meat part, which is the presentation. And then as we kind of filter through the questions, if you got to bump to another meeting or something, we fully understand that. Anyways, we are recording this presentation and we will share the slides with you afterwards. You are on the listen in mode, but we do want you to submit your questions in the Q&A below. And if you see a question you like, go ahead and upvote it, and that will help us prioritize the questions. As always, we are very grateful to our sponsors for supporting us to put this on, and I just want to recognize them. Enterprise Product Partners, the Houston Pilots, the Houston Marriott South Hobby Airport Hotel, Intercontinental Terminal Company, Kinder Morgan, Moran Shipping Agencies, Regions Bank, Targa Resources, and the West Gulf Maritime Association. Today, we're pleased to have with us Vincent DiCosimo, which we at the Port Bureau know very well because he's our first vice chairman of the Port Bureau. He's a midstream energy executive for Targa Resources and has extensive leadership experience in the industry field, in the energy field. He has served as CEO of 3 separate companies. He's a doer, whether it's in his church community or in the athletic field or in the business community. My interaction with him is he does his homework first and then he gets involved. And from looking at his bio, you can see he's been involved from Sugarland to the oil fields to the port. And as he sort of shares with me, he sees them all connected and delivering prosperity to not only this region, but the state and the nation. So you'll get a good depth of his understanding of his homework that he does and what he's trying to show with this Project 11 as we go forward. So I'm pleased now to turn the floor over to Vincent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. Let me switch the screen sharing here and say thanks to the Greater Houston Port Bureau as well, and everyone that's on the air with us right now. Appreciate your interest in what's going on in the Houston Ship Channel. I would just tell you, I think it's one of the most exciting things that I've been involved in my life. And I think it's one of the most important things we can be doing in the Houston, Harris County, state of Texas, and frankly in the United States. It's the most important artery in the United States, and expanding it is so very important. Since I'm using Targa's logo on my slides, and there are some slides that do have some Targa data, I do need to let you know that these are my opinions. These are not necessarily Targa's opinions. And if you hear something that looks or sounds like a forward-looking statement, it is, don't rely on it and don't go trade around it. And if you want to take some more time to read our 10Ks and Qs, you can, and any other additional information, you can certainly look at our website. For discussion purposes, I think first and foremost, I want to have a very quick look back, because outside of probably the line, "You're muted" right now, I think the second probably most repeated line in 2020 will be, when is 2020 going to be over? And looking back at 2020 and understanding kind of the COVID implications in a commodity environment are very important to how we view the Houston Ship Channel going forward. So I'm going to have a quick look back at that. And then I want to talk about Project 11. And again, I don't want you to think this is something that is, that I know everything about. Certainly this is the ports project, but I want to tell you why I'm involved. And I want to tell you why I think it's important that we are all involved in Project 11 and how we as industry participants help expedite Project 11 and making Houston Ship Channel safer and a more efficient channel. So those are kind of the big bullet points. And as Bill said, I have a lot of slides and a lot of data that I'm going to roll through in here. So let me look back at 2020 if I can quickly. And you'll see here the highlighted line. And I think this is incredible. This is incredible. When we look at 2020 and we say to ourselves, last March, a year ago, in fact, a year ago today, when the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, we're 1 year away. That was 1 year ago. Would we have thought that we would have only been off 4% in terms of volume after a record 2019 year in 2020 in terms of our ship channel volumes? Would we have ever thought it would have been only 4%? The soothsayers on the economy, the forecasters had doom all over what was going to be forthcoming. So at the end of the year in 2020, and these are the ports numbers that we capture through Harbor Lights as a part of the Greater Houston Port Bureau, again, another reason to join us, we'll slide that in right there, is the fact that we capture this data. So only 4% off, okay? If we look at charts last year, it's wild when I look at these charts. And I cut them off at April. So here we were at April, and we know that crude oil was $34 in April. Today we're over 64. Natural gas was $1.77. We're over $3. And last year's rig count was down here, and we had lost 400 rigs down in the 300. Hasn't been quite the rebound on the rig count. We're up around 403 as of last Friday. What is the future telling us right now in terms of what dollar value do we need to get back to the barrels in America? And this is crude oil only, plus LPGs. And in terms of the barrels that we need to have, what values are we at? Well, obviously at $45, we're above that. $50, we're above that. $55 right now, we're above that. And what that would say is on the left, you would see the scaling that we will be back in a range where we're back producing 18 to 19 million barrels, which is the base case that currently Citi, Bank, and EIA have. Now, again, look where we were in 18, 19, we were peaking. So the suggestion is coming that by probably the end of 21, we will not only peak higher than we were in 19, but surpass that. And I can tell you this morning, I was on an early call, the forecast now is for us to reach over 100 million barrels again of demand, which is where we were in 2019 by August. So we have recovered in one short year what last year everyone thought basically we were done. Crude oil exports continue to be at a high. We're now at an 11-month high, and we're continuing to see volumes move. Container volumes continue to move, and we're on all these charts you notice are up and to the right. Resin exports continue. LPG or propane exports continue to rise and have continued to rise. All of these commodities continue to grow. What's important about them? They all rely on the port to basically exit the United States, and to some degree rely on the port for imports into the United States. Well, let's look at some things, because I know there's a lot of information out there that everyone wants to talk about in terms of, hey, there's peak oil, there's peak generation, we have renewables that are growing. Many of our companies and many people on the line are involved in how do we lower greenhouse gases, and it's certainly something we're all interested in, and how do we improve the environment globally. So where are the primary fuel users going, and what's happening? So this is important because when we look at in-use sectors right now on the kinds of fuels, thermal fuels today, you can see that still transportation is a big one. Industry is still the biggest single user of fuel today. If we look by region, you can see there's basically flat growth in a lot of the regions. The OECD flattens out. You can see that China continues to grow. If we look at who is basically providing the fuel and what kind of fuel is going into these regions and for usage, you'll see still hydrocarbon or oil is still the main, all the way out to 2040, the main fuel. Gas continues to have a growing component, and that gas, by the way, is LNG or LPGs. You'll see that coal is still, believe it or not, growing, and it's growing predominantly only in China. There's some nuclear growth, hydro, and then the renewables are growing. So we're going to participate in that renewables market. And that market, let me also say, is going to move via water. This is a busy chart. I only do it for effect because I hear a lot about other ports in Texas, and I'm proud of Texas. I don't want to diminish the state and the other ports, but there is no other port like Houston. There is no other port almost in the world that has the infrastructure that we have for industry and for manufacturing, for imports and for exports. All you got to do is look at this chart, and this is only the crude oil infrastructure. I couldn't have begun to have gotten petrochemical, manufacturing, rice, wheat, cattle, all of the other ones, we wouldn't be able to see the page. It is phenomenal when we look at Port Houston and what's going on here. It is truly the most important artery in the world. And as Jim Teague once said, who's the co-CEO of Enterprise, it's more important today than the Port of Hormuz. So think about that, or the Straits of Hormuz. When I look at over the years, and some of this is anecdotal to many of you, but I have to shout out to our pilots because they do a tremendous job. The pilots were basically established back in 1914. They actually had some assignments as late as 1868 when I did my homework. I wasn't even aware of that. And Pop Ferguson actually appointed the first two pilots, Fred Allen and William Lawton. Those were the first two pilots. They had a boat looking like this thing on the right. And today our pilots climb up the side of the ships, and it's amazing what they do in our waters today to move these 8,000 vessels inbound and outbound, so almost 18,000 total transits a year. Unbelievable. We rely on them, and we need them as a part of this whole solution on what are we doing when we widen and deepen this channel. Let's take a very quick look, and this is a Port Houston slide, which I kind of stole a little bit, but I think it's great. So let's look back there at the very beginning when these pilots started moving these volumes. What was going on? Well, the state of Texas barely had almost 5 million people, not quite, okay? Tonnage was very small boats, and there was hardly anything going on in terms of containers because they didn't exist until 1958. So as we move forward today, let's just hop to the other side and see where it looks like we're going. At the left, you notice that the channel in the purple here was around, I don't know if you're seeing me move my screen around there, but the channel on the left, oh, I'm sorry, was in purple was container depths. And today, obviously, the depth of the channel was 25 feet. Today, we're 45 feet, and we're trying to go deeper in many sections where it's not 45 feet. You can see in terms of the container volumes that only began as early as or as late as 1958, those volumes have continued to grow. And when we look at TEUs, which is what the container industry looks at, and those that are on the line with us know that, they look at TEUs and total tonnage, if you will. And right now, an average vessel that's coming into Houston is, say, 8 to 10,000 TEUs, 8 to 10,000 boxes on them, where the dot really is around 14,000, and that's sort of what we'd like to see for the channel to be able to get to 14.5. That requires a little bit bigger ship. And there are ships today that are even larger than that. We have large LPG ships today, and those LPG ships are moving out into the globe today. LPG ships also require deeper, wider channels, and that's important. LPGs today are important in lowering greenhouse gases. They help over 3 billion people today provide fuel and warmth. So when we look at the exports, both for propane and butane on the right side of the screen here, those are part of that growing line I showed you earlier. So now we have growing containers, growing LPGs, which LPGs were up 23% last year in terms of total exports. And we see the need just on a couple of different commodities. If I look on the left side of your screen, you'll notice that today, the largest single exports in terms of total export volume, in terms of ports, there is no other. It's us. It's Port Houston. And this is looked at by MSAs as opposed to just singularly ports, but same. If we look at commodities from the state of Texas last year that were exported, not imports necessarily, but exported. I'm speaking right now, and I'll talk some about imports. You can see that crude oil and petroleum products, petroleum oils, light oils, all of these things that are on the right side, LPGs, aircraft engines, all of these things were exported out, but hydrocarbons still make up the majority of exports out of the Houston Ship Channel. How do hydrocarbons move? They move by vessel, they move by truck, they move by rail, in and out of the port. So another important feature we have to think about is the critical need to also talk about infrastructure upgrades for the trucking industry on the land side. And I know we're going to talk about Project 11, but I encourage all of you, if you have an opportunity to talk to your state legislatures, talk to your city council folks. Again, Harris County has 26 different cities that make up Harris County. If you're talking to those people too, encourage them to encourage Washington to give the state of Texas and Houston part of the dollars out of this new $1.9 trillion package, because it has a huge infrastructure bill that's included in it. And some of that infrastructure dollars, we need to come to Houston, folks. So a little shout out to get some help there, because trucks still move America on land. Rail is important. The rail infrastructure here, we need upgrades in that, and we need upgrades in trucks and transportation infrastructure. Very important. The Port of Houston is 52 miles long. I know almost everybody knows that. The majority of industry is in this section right here. There are 200 private terminals in the Port of Houston. It's #1 in container port, #1 international trade, #1 in cargo, #1 in steel. We're just, we're humble, but we're #1, okay? And in order to maintain that status on a global basis, we have to be wider and deeper. Look at the commodity mix that we have. I know I talk about hydrocarbons, but inbound and outbound, in addition to that, we have steel, refined products, chemicals. We have all kinds of construction materials. We have the large blades that you see on the wind farms that are out in the San Angelo area, in the Midland area. We have tons of consumer goods. If you're an iPad, iWatch, whatever it might be, those things are imports. So over 2019, and this was the most recent data I could find, but again, if you take 2019 and deduct 4%, we're probably pretty close for 2020. The port had over 285 million tons of product inbound and outbound. That is significant, absolutely amazing. If we look at what does the port do for the whole state, for the whole region, again, 3.2 million jobs, 53% of all Texas port products come in and out of Houston. $802 billion of economic value to our state. It's worth 1.3 million jobs, and that's growing. That is growing. Again, economic value, $339 billion from the Port of Houston. So 72% of all Texas ports right here in the Port of Houston. And it's growing. And in order to make that growth happen, we have to do a couple of things. We have to rely on the ability to expand. So let's talk about why we need to expand. 83% of all Port Houston traffic right now is energy related, and it's going to continue to grow. That number, may change over time, but the world export of petroleum products and imports, LPGs, is just going to continue to grow as the manufacturing growth happens. If you look at the size of vessels, okay, let's look at a Vlgc, which is on the top right-hand side here, is a vessel that requires 250 to 300 meters long and has 4 to 6 storage tanks. It's very large. New Panamaxes that fit through the Panama Canal are 1,200 feet plus long, 160 feet wide. They're 50 feet in depth. And then Vlccs, which are very large crude ships, are 1,540 feet long. They've got a 200-foot beam and obviously draft 66 feet. Ships are getting larger and larger. And again, as I mentioned, on the container side, today, we have ships now that can haul 24,000 TEUs, the new class of vessel that is out there. There's 12 of these today. So if you think about, in my simplistic way, you've got the big ships that are still going to move large cargoes around the world, but they're still going to connect to intermediate sized ships. We have to be able to be in that marketplace globally, even though we think more locally. And so we have to be prepared for what's going on. Port Houston has done a really great job of preparing for being able to bring in some of the larger ships. They've led a $35 million contract. They've got some new cranes they've put up for these new Neo-Panamax ships that are being installed. They're going to be done, I think, I don't want to speak totally for the port, but from my information from the port, it's somewhere end of the summer of 21, and they'll be operational. That's important. Those are going to be able to handle some of the larger ships, up to 18,000 TEU equivalents even. Container traffic is important. In my industry, our compressors, our pumps, our component parts, our control room parts, a lot of those are imported and they come inside those containers. Many of our other commodities that we use, whether it's FAR suits or other things in our industry that were valves, fittings, also come and are manufactured. We have on the other side of that, the petrochemical side, where the resins are produced here and are going out. But today, the narrowness of the ship channel, if you look, only allows ships right now in that 6,000 to 8,000 TEU capacity to really transit. So that's another reason. It helps us all in terms of our cost, what we pay for things, and diminishes our cost if we can get larger cargo in. So why is Vincent DiCosimo talking about what's going on in the ship channel and he's not necessarily connected to the port? That's a big part of why I'm talking to you. I'm a very big advocate and proponent to being able to expedite this thing, because I see in our industry, the hydrocarbon side of the industry, as well as the manufacturing side of the industry on the petrochemical side, we cannot wait out until 2035 or 2045. I showed you population data. We're 29 million Texans alone. Growth in America is growing. Demand for consumer products is growing. If we took the old-fashioned way, where we got through all this study and the pre-planning, and now we actually have the new start, which is where we're at, and we did the old-fashioned thing, which is let the federal government divvy up the dollars from O&B based on political bias, on who's in office or who's not, or who said what to whom, we would be getting dollars dribbling into us all through this part, and we would not reach probably construction until 2035-ish. The answer was to have what was called a locally preferred plan, and that was the route that the port decided to go with industry support. And it's an accelerated plan that said, hey, we'll do all these things very quickly, and when you give us that new start, we'll be ready to go, because funding will be authorized on a local level, and we'll figure out how to pay for it. And by doing that, we can go forward and get the project done by maybe 2025. That's a pretty significant difference over a decade. And it's a huge difference to the economic value of the state of Texas, and in fact, the United States. Let's just look at projects so you can believe that I'm not just saying something without some facts behind it for you. Here's a slide of projects that have actually been approved. They went through WARDA. Some of them actually have O&B approval. And you can see the dates that they were approved, and now where they're looking at completion dates: 2027, the Kentucky Lock Edition's 2041. They first were 2023, then it was 2041. Here was one that was 2032. The upper locks in the Mississippi, 2064. High Island of Brazos River, 2016. Now it's out there 2053. That one may be brought forward some. But if you just look down the list, this is what happens, because each year another project gets new start. Another 90 or 80 projects show up for the Army Corps to try to approve. There's a backlog of projects dating back almost a decade that have been approved that have yet to receive $1 of new start funding. So it takes all of us working together, the Army Corps, the community here in Texas, industry, and the port to move forward. Again, I remind you, the Houston Ship Channel has over 18,000 plus transits a year. That's inbound and outbound. I remind you that the majority of the industry is all up in this area. So it is basically the area, as I will show you later, on sections 1C forward. So we need a wider ship channel, a deeper ship channel, and that provides many things for us on our side, right? It reduces idle times, saves day rates, lowers emissions and fuel. It maintains our world-class, and Houston as a world-class port, and it continues to provide for this national security gateway to the world. It also, when I talk about safer, we've had a number of issues over the last few years. Again, the benefit of a Port Houston slide, these are not things we all want to talk about. I don't want to talk about it. What we want to figure out is how do we reduce that to zero? And again, I champion the pilots. They do a fantastic job and have done a great job at root cause analysis and trying to be sure we don't have that happen. So let's take a very quick look for those of you who may not be totally familiar. What is the ship channel and Project 11, and how do we look at the improvements on that project? So 1A, 1B, these sections right here are necessary. They're coming in. Obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of the industry is up and through these sections. So 1C, and you can read on the left, and you can go to their website, the Port Houston website, and you can click on each one of these sections, and it will tell you a lot more about it. But I wanted to just give you an idea of how each one of the sections is being looked at and how we're moving along through these sections and where industry exists. So 1A, 1B, clearly not a whole lot of industry down through this area, but a great need to get this channel wider and start to make it safer. You know what happens in terms of fog days. And so, going from Bolivar Roads to Redfish Island and then up, that will help us significantly as we start to look at both safety, traffic, and again, where we've had issues in the past. Let me also talk for a second, as we look at these sections, there's a tremendous amount of time that Chairman Campo and the port have put into how to make this a better channel and environmentally better channel. And my hat is off to them, because the creation of some new oyster reefs, Bird Island, and again, I encourage you to go to the Port Houston website to look at these benefits. We all live in the same world. We all live in the same world. We all want the same clean air and clean water, and the port has done a fabulous job at trying to look at how they can make this project, as it moves forward, and enhance the environment and be a better partner to a number of the cities and communities through the 52 miles of the ship channel. So what does it cost to do all this? And that's really what I know is on your mind. And I want to talk a little bit about how we as industry can step in and help to pay for this. It's a $1 billion project. And again, we could go through the dribbles and drabbles and try to get 15 million or 20 million a year and build a little section down here and then wait another year and demobilize and then mobilize again and hope that someday we reach up the upper waters and where a lot of the businesses are, the 200 plus terminals are up through here, and hope that we can live long enough to see it get done. Or there's alternatives. Again, let's just take a quick look back and why we now have even a greater sense of urgency. We were able, and I say we, the port, with some industry support, obviously, was really able to achieve something that had not ever been done. And that was, in the course of barely a year, receive the chief's approval, which was the chief engineer for a project back in April. We received WARDA approval December the 22nd, and received a new start, meaning project ready to go, on January 20th of 2021. Most of the times, if you look at a project, and there's one that's not far from here, they received their WARDA in 2011, or excuse me, Chief Report 2011, their WARDA in 2014, new start was in 2017 and haven't really started to receive much federal dollars. To remain number one, and I'm reminding you again of this, in tonnage, waterborne tonnage, foreign waterborne tonnage, and vessel transits, we have to move forward quickly. So what was the background on trying to get something done? We have just looked with the port at how do we move forward with some kind of a fee schedule so that we have a vessel fee help offset the cost of this, and we can move forward as opposed to waiting for federal dollars. So let me give you a little of the background and history on this, if I can. And I'm not going to read everything off the page. You may be quick enough to read it and have some questions at the end. I'll try to answer what I can. But basically, industry in July of 2019 said, we'll take a look at how can we help pay for this through some kind of a vessel fee. We looked at it through the fall of 2019, and in fact, February 12th of 2020, so a little over a year ago, I sat before the port commissioners and I outlined a very similar proposal at that time on Project 11. How do we pay for this with a vessel fee? Now there's a U.S. code, and I won't get everybody bogged down in the U.S. code 2236, but there's a code that says, hey, you could do this under certain circumstances. So the port is looking at how it can do it, because to do it, only the port can collect those fees. We can't have an industry group or the Greater Houston Port Bureau or somebody else go out and collect those fees. Only the port can do that. The port's enlisted outside counsel to look at this, and as they so should, and evaluate it. There's been some instances where people have looked at it, tried it. Sabine Natchez is probably the most current one that currently is using 2236. And if you have, for those of you who may have, offices or have sites, berths in the Sabine Natchez, you're aware of this, but they're also using 2236 for a vessel fee. An economic study is being done as well, and was done. We've worked with vessel data in terms of what did vessels look like with a wider, deeper channel going forward, and how would we look going forward in terms of dollar generation for a user fee charged per vessel. And we've done that and come up with a model. Now again, I'll take a breath, because I know there's a lot of discussion, and I've personally received emails and questions, which is good. And I know Captain Bill has as well, and I know many others have a lot of things that you'd like to ask about this. So what I'm going to show you is a sample model. I also want to have a disclaimer, as I promised Roger Gunther I would have, that the example is not something the port right now has totally agreed to. So I want people to be aware of that. It's something we're looking at. How do we help pay to expedite this under the locally preferred plan? And the idea was to model it very simple and as close to the way that currently the pilots collect their fees, or the pilots' pilotage fees are collected. With the ease of implementation, the ease of administration, everyone participates. One of the key factors in being able to charge a fee is that it needs to be something everyone participates and receives the same benefit out of, such as a wider, deeper channel is safer for all. It needs to be equitable. So we've looked at that and we said, okay, the way that we can do that is to use an LOA times being on the vessels that come in. We created the dollar factor, and then we came up with what we said would the dollar factor would be able to be translated into real dollars, and how much would it cost. So from an example only on this ship that's 700 feet long by 106, which happens to be one that would fit at my docks, there was a dollar factor that came up to 742. We multiplied it times this dollar factor, which we, again, was through an algorithm, and I won't bore you with how we came up with it, but it comes up to about $2,200 per transit to fund. That's an example only. And that would be inbound and outbound. So basically $4,400 per vessel to get inbound and outbound. I'm pausing so that you can absorb that, because I know some people are saying we don't need to pay another fee. But think for yourself, if that ship is waiting to come in and it waits an hour a day, what is that costing you right now? what is it costing you in terms of fuel? What's the environment cost? What's it costing you for the ship cost? What's it costing you for crew? So if we can expedite by hours your vessels getting in with a wider and deeper ship channel, I propose to you, I know in our analysis, we know that this amount of money, plus or minus, it might scale up, might scale down, but in that range is more than offset by the savings we have. So I would ask all of you to think about that. Now, I know there's some FAQs that came in early, and I appreciated those because it gave me a chance to go ahead and just outline them. And I always talk about the one, radio station, whether it's iHeart or Pandora that everybody listens to, and it's WIIFM. And you may say, what is that? Well, that is what's in it for me. That's the station that everybody tunes into. So what's in it for me? Well, it's a safer channel. And if you don't believe that is the most important thing, then we probably would disagree from here on out, because safety, bar none, is the most important thing that widening and deepening will give us. We believe it gives you better dock scheduling as well. Why? Because although there is dock congestion today, sometimes, it's because a vessel got in later than it was supposed to be there. So we should have better dock scheduling. And one of the things that the Greater Houston Port Bureau is involved with right now today is it's involved with the ability to do additional dock scheduling. And so we're looking at ways through our Pronto program to say, how can we enhance efficiencies across the docks? It should save on the merge and fuel savings, again, less environmental impact, and just better overall freight efficiencies on the land side, where we have trucks backed up for miles and rail that has gotten congested. So all of that is what's in it for you and what's in it for me. Is the fee charged on every movement? And I think I answered, yes, it's charged on the inbound and outbound. Is it going to be like the Panama Canal transit fee? Yes, it's a singular fee, inbound and outbound. It's not charging you for distance or intra-port movements. When does the fee begin? Well, the law is pretty clear, can only begin when it's completed. Great question was the follow-on, was that mean a segment or totally? The example shows you at the end of 3 to 5 years. I would have to put that back to the port and discussions to see how they would want to start applying the fee. And that'll come out of their discussions with obviously their outside counsel and how they feel a fee can be applied. I know parcel ships need congestion on the dock to ease. How does that help? And again, I think I answered that in question 1. The better scheduling of ships at the dock means we should have better dock scheduling and less congestion on the docks. Does the wider, deeper channel give the pilots more ability to move in vessels in bad weather, fog extended days, daylight hours, what? Again, I tell you, we've been involved with the pilots. We've done modeling with the pilots. I don't want to speak for them. I'm not going to tell you to start moving ships in the middle of fog days, but we do feel it enhances the ability, certainly, to move ships and stage ships and do things that will enhance our overall capabilities. And I'm sure as the pilots look forward at how they'll be able to avail themselves in a wider, deeper channel, there will be greater efficiencies for them. And again, the subsequent question that came up, are they charged for interport movements? Ships are not going to be charged. The model doesn't charge for interport movements as we see it today. I want to again caution everybody. These are the outline that we have talked about in our industry meetings on a small group level and through a number of other kind of breakout meetings. It's not something the port has yet said, this is the way we're going to move forward. So I do want to just make sure everybody's clear on that. But it is a way that as an industry participant, I share with you in my final comments here before we go to Q&A, that I think it's important, and it's part of the sharing. It's part of how do we make this happen on an expedited basis to be sure that the legacy we leave for not only our industry peers and our colleagues, but our children, the grandchildren, and the people that will continue to live in Houston and Harris County and the state of Texas, that we leave them with a legacy where we did something that was amazing, that something that was expedited, and something that continued the growth of this state. And to do that requires all of these participants on this page. You, me, industry at large, the Corps, our communities, the Port of Houston, and obviously We continue to have to work with all of our state and local and federal representatives. So we need a cooperative through everybody that is basically going to be involved in the Houston Ship Channel widening and deepening. So with that, I close. I tell you, I'm passionate about it. Again, we need your help. The questions are good, and I'm not sure I can answer everything for you, but I'll turn it back to Captain Bill. And thank you very, very much for this opportunity today. And it's fun to talk about something else other than COVID. Bill?
Yes. Let me remind the audience that you can send in questions. I have some pre-arranged questions, which I shared with Vincent earlier, but I'm going to go back and just kind of review those just to make sure that we're explicit with them so that they understand it. So basically, when the idea of expediting this ship channel came up, and they said, okay, it's $1 billion for a ship channel that generates 800 billion a year. Industry said that makes sense to us. And then the idea was, well, how would it be funded? And that's when industry started looking at it and different things, and sort of went through the process of, can it be charged to the facilities? You know, blanket fee, assessed all the facilities, or whatever. And you did your homework on it to get to where it has to be a user fee for services rendered. So
Correct.
you have to get a mortgage or whatever you call it, let it, the building or construction period. And once that segment is maybe complete, you can then charge. So let's say the Bay Reach, one Alpha Bravo Charlie coming across the Galveston Bay. That's really where the, you know, when those sections are complete, would you see it as when the fee, can you just kind of explain that again? As because I know the ship owners are saying, why are we paying and why isn't Harris County paying? Why isn't the homeowners paying? Why isn't Tom, Dick, and Harry and Jane paying?
Understand. And great questions. Are there other funding mechanisms that could fund this project? The answer is clearly yes. You could do bonds, you could do lots of things. We're in a very difficult time overall in the way that funding would work, and none of them help to really expedite the project. All of them are the long-term funding mechanisms. They are the ones that allocate every year a certain amount of funds or no funds to your project. That's one. Two is if you said, hey, terminal operators, you just pick up the tab. Or if you're one of the refineries or a petrochemical plant, well, you're big, you pick up the tab. Or why doesn't the county just pay for the whole thing? There's lots of reasons why that just doesn't work. And the law is very clear on who can or cannot charge fees and how it's collected. And the law was pretty explicit that the only way it can be done is through the port charging a fee, and the fee ends up being on a per vessel charge. And that's when you look at how to expedite it and have a program that does that, that's how you can charge the fee. Now, one piece, not to get bogged down, Bill, but you put on, you spoke about right there very quickly was, so the idea is that yes, there is a funding mechanism for the big chunk of money, if you will, okay, that comes from an outside source that doesn't come from the federal government. That is why you're able to go ahead and use that large sum of injection of capital to go ahead today and start the construction and know you're going to be able to complete it in 4 or 5 years, as opposed to waiting for each segment to receive capital funding. And so that's a very important key to this, yes.
Okay, let me drill down, because then the other piece that always comes up is, okay, I get it, the tankers are getting bigger, the LPG ships are getting bigger, the container ships are getting bigger, but I'm a little chemical guy and I'm scooting around, or I'm a break bulk, ship coming up to the upper part of the thing. And I'm like, I'm not sure why I'm carrying as much of this load as the bigger ships. And can you explain how you're sort of trying to address that?
Yeah, I kind of went through that, and it's probably not as clear, but let me answer. when we look at that allocation of the way the fee's charged, it's based on the size of the vessel, so LOA times beam times draft, and so a smaller ship would pay far less than the larger ship would pay.
Okay. And then you looked at how many tankers are coming in versus the other ships, and the larger the ships are actually the bigger volume within the port compared to the smaller ships, right?
Yes, clearly, as Harbor Lights reflects, it is the volume, the majority of the volume. That's correct.
How about barges? Are they going to pay?
We did not allocate anything for barges right now in the modeling that we've done. No, good question. Now, it is interesting to note there are about 200,000 barge movements in our channel, which I think is an astonishing number that people need to realize. It's fabulous.
They're critical. They're critical to our port, really, especially domestic. So let me ask you a question on maintenance. So we pony up the $1 billion and it's a locally preferred plan. Who picks up the tab for maintaining it after we're done? Does that come back to us, or?
Well, again, I don't want to step out of my bounds here with the port. There has been a lot of discussion on how ongoing maintenance is going to be done and whether that's going to be done through an allocation on an annual basis, or as you know, and many people on the line are aware, we have Harbor Maintenance Trust, and for the first time, I think forever almost, there was a much big allocation out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust that came back to help us with dredging. So I think that is still in play. I don't want to overstep my ski tips here and tell you I know the answer to that right now. It's certainly something we're trying. Let me say this: industry, along with the port, is trying to push that back and say, look, if we're paying for the thing, you need to maintain it.
Right. I think my understanding of it is that you have to get the Army Corps to agree to that before you dig dirt the first day.
Yes.
So it's kind of like if we're going to expand the street in front of our house and we're willing to pick up the tab to do that, if we want them to pay for the maintenance of that street, they have to agree to it before we even begin construction.
Yes.
That's a big push that we got in front of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me look at some of the other questions here. This one says, Corpus gained ground while we lost ground in transits. I thought they were less diversified, more energy-based than Houston. I'm not sure about that question. As far as if we don't do this, I guess will the industry move south to Corpus? Maybe, I don't know if that's a question or not.
I don't know how to answer that question. I look at where we're at, and if you look at the volume, I'm looking at total volume. We are, 4x of Corpus already, and while 2020 might have been sort of a unique year for a number of reasons, most importantly, I will cite to you something I do know about. In their first quarter of crude oil exports was a record Q1 in 2020. And by the end of 2020, they started to see those pick up again, but the middle part of 2020 was very limited. So on a percentage basis, when you look at their numbers, it does look up because they had an unbelievable Q1 in crude oil exports. We are obviously tremendously more diversified than they are. And again, I think they do a great job in what they do, but that was a big part of why they were able to have kind of an up year, if you will. Well,
it's also important to note that if we don't take on the liquefied petroleum gases, they can't move the oil. So, and the LNG plants can't move the LNG. Everyone's got to work in concert. The bigger thing about Houston that I see is we are a manufacturing center. So that stuff's coming here, and there's jobs and there's plants, and they're manufacturing the plastics where that's going right to the dock, onto the ship and gone. We do that here in the conveyor belt, but we also add a lot of value within the port community, which is where we get to that huge $800 billion number. So
absolutely. And
so I do see one question here about demurrage, which I think is interesting because you kind of touched on it, but you didn't really talk about what is that? What is demurrage $10? Is it $1,000? Is it, for a ship? that may be delayed to come up because we don't have the infrastructure to meet our demands going forward. Can you kind of talk about what?
Well, it's a significant amount of money, and it obviously depends on ship size, crew, et cetera. But ranges probably on the low side of maybe $25,000 a day, a high side $100,000 a day. It's significant, to say the least.
So if the ship channel gets wide, and the understanding is that some of the ships that are not allowed to move except for daylight, the pilots would consider moving those, extending their window as far as when they, not necessarily at night, but on the shoulders of that, and we would be able to move more ships, the larger ships, which would free up, a day's demurrage on a large ship is a big number, right? Is that accurate?
I think that's sort of the thinking that we have and the modeling that we've done in the past. And again, I'm sure Captain Thompson is grimacing. I'm not going to say for him that, yes, that's the answer, but I think we are certainly feeling like with a wider and deeper channel, certainly a wider channel, the ability for us adds a much better degree of safety in those shoulder hours. And yes, that would be a possibility. And we certainly feel that way in our modeling.
Okay. Let's see, I see another one here. No, that's not. I'm still trying to get through the questions here. It looks like a bunch of share things as far as where you can get additional information. Oh, there's one. So this is a question you've sort of gone over once, but we'll go back and revisit it. So a ship comes in, let's say a chemical ship comes in. What I heard you say was the in and outbound transit is where to be charged. So if a chemical ship comes in and goes to one of the terminals and then moves up to another terminal and then moves to a third terminal and then leaves and goes offshore to maybe do tank cleaning and then comes back in, it wouldn't be charged for those intermoves, but it would be charged for the first visit. And then whenever it went down the channel, whatever it did had to go out there for anchorage or wait for another terminal. Those two you're considering as inbound and outbound. Is that correct?
Yes, as captured today, yes.
Okay, so the idea is that, yeah, they do make a lot of movements. If they stay within the port and schedule efficiency in a series type thing, they wouldn't be charged as fee double. But if they have to go in and out, then they would pick up that cost.
Yes.
Okay. What is a normal time for the Army Corps to review submittals, and does it create a bottleneck on the project?
I'm not sure I understand submittals.
I know that the Port Authority has pushed in very hard on helping to get all this engineering done up front, so that when the funding issues addressed, everything is sort of ready to go, right? I mean, and that's
correct.
Kind of what they're doing right now. What they're doing is kind of looking at, is the funding thing fair, and is it consistent with, does it harm the competitiveness of the port? Really, isn't that? But sort of some of the thinking is, if you don't do it, the competitiveness of the port will be harmed, right?
Correct.
That's kind of where we're at.
I think the answer to that is, let me see if I can help a little bit very quickly. So the port has done a great job on getting pre-engineering and engineering started on their own ticket. And I've forgotten the magnitude of the number, but a significant amount of dollars that the port allocated last fall, port commissioners approved, and they were able to get some pre-engineering done. So by virtue of that, the Corps is accelerated its involvement. I'm not sure I understand how quickly they approve something, but they work along. It's a step-by-step process. And there's an approval of a step and then the next step. So it's not as if there's a singular day that everything gets stamped. That day was way back there on the chief's report, so to speak. That's the one day that was a key important date, was last year in April, when the chief signed off on the overall port plan. Now the individual engineering steps, again, work in concert with the timing of how you submit a plan and they address it, and it moves forward as the project is moving forward.
Okay, I think we have time for about one more question. This one, I haven't seen this question before, but I think I'll ask it anyway. So if we as industries decide to expedite this and actually come up with this fee thing, which would be sort of orchestrated by the Port Authority, and then down the road, could we go back to the government and say, hey, you were going to dribble drabble this money, kick the money down to us, and we'll rebate the people that paid? Is that a possibility, or?
That's a great question, and I would hesitate to even opine on that at this time. I would say it's a great thought, something that could be considered I guess at that point in time.
I get the general impression, just from my experience, that once you open the door, just like once you start dredging, if you haven't got an agreement for maintenance, you own it. And I think if you say we're going to pay for it, I don't see the Army Corps coming back later and saying, you know what, we're going to refund you that money. That would be a precedence that would open a lot of Pandora's boxes around the nation for them. So
I would agree. I would think so.
All right, I'll give you one last second to kind of summarize it, and then I'll go ahead and close it up if you have a last minute comment.
No, I would just say thanks, Bill, again. I really appreciated the opportunity today. I appreciate everybody who took time out of your day to tune in and take a look at this. Lot more discussion on this. Happy to answer some one-off questions. It is without a doubt, and I say this to you in all sincerity, the most singular, important project right now happening, in my opinion, in the United States. And we don't receive the recognition on a federal level that it really is. It's not a replacement of a bridge over the Mississippi River, and those are important projects. It is the lifeblood. It is the main artery of commodity flows. It is the main artery of economic growth for not just Houston and Texas, but really for all the South and Southeast and Southwest region. So I encourage you to get involved in a project, find out more about it. Those are some great questions, and we appreciate any help we can get.
Right. Well, we appreciate you taking a leadership role on this and actually coming forward and standing up here and taking a couple shots from the arrows and stuff like that, because there is a lot to be worked out, but we appreciate what you've done and the leadership you're showing. So thank you. I will kind of close it up with just the announcement of our Commerce Club, which will be next the second Thursday of April on the 8th, and we will feature Chairman Reginald McKinney. He is of the Houston Pilot Board. We've asked him to come talk because, as you know, they're standing up, and we want them to kind of just go over what is the role and value of the board, what are some of their priorities the commissioners are looking at, and just give us an overview of where the board is. And we find that would be very helpful to us as a community right now. So with that, we will close out for the day. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. Of course, you can call us and give us more questions and find out a little bit more amplifying information. That's what we're trying to do with this community involvement. So with that, that'll conclude the webinar today. Thank you.